I'm pleased to be joined now by Golden Globe nominee Ava DuVernay, who is director of the critically acclaimed movie Selma. Thank you for being with me today. And I want to start by just saying I know this film pretty well. I saw it, as you know, on January 4th, and you very kindly responded to my tweet about it. I couldn't stand up from watching the movie. I had to just sort of sit and think about it. And one of the aspects of it that was so striking for me is that you changed my understanding of a story that I thought I already knew by shifting the perspective and channeling it through the narrative of so many of the women who were central to the film. And I'm wondering if that was a purposive choice.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I remember I got a tweet saying that you were going into the screening, and I did time my watch for 2 hours and 5 minutes after that point to see what you would tweet, if anything. So I was relieved that it was a good outcome. But yes, no, I mean, when I first came on board the project, the women were not they were not there at all, and so it was really important to start to just realign the story and gain some balance. We know historically that the women of the movement have not been bolstered, have not been amplified as much as they should be for all of the amazing work that was done in all corners in different ways, from Diane Nash and her savvy strategy to someone like Richie Jean Jackson, a woman that we have portrayed in the film who was a real nurturer of the movement and who clothed and fed these men as they were working in Selma, which is, in my mind, of equal importance. And so, it was vital that they be included in this narrative, and there was no other way that I could be involved if they weren't.
One of the maybe most difficult moments when you shift that perspective for us is when the film does the work of discussing the infidelity. But rather than do it simply through the FBI tapes or simply through King, you give it to us through Coretta Scott King in such you avoid any melodrama there. The film is actually very quiet in that moment, despite how much pain is going on. And quite honestly, as much as I knew that part of the story, it never occurred to me to fully think about those costs that were borne by Coretta Scott King.
That's right. Well, I mean, I think, when we talk about that scene and just the way that we deal with the rumored infidelities of King, I think it really speaks to having different perspectives and different kinds of filmmakers behind the camera. I mean, certainly there have been scripts floating around out here in Hollywood about King, and it's been interesting to read the different ways that filmmakers have tried to tackle that particular subject matter, King's extramarital activity. But for me, as a woman filmmaker, I'm not interested in some of the things that I've seen my male counterparts be interested in, which is the act of the infidelity itself, going into the hotel room or being with the FBI as they tape. For me, it was really simple. Of course, I want to know what the sister waiting at home for you says. What was it like when you walked in the door after that tape arrived? How did these two people who are in this relationship deal with it? So it was always clear to me that it had to be dealt with in the context of their marriage. But I think it really speaks to the importance of having different kinds of people behind the camera, women, people of color. Different perspectives will deal with all kinds of subject matter in different ways. And it's about time we be more diverse in those areas and those representations.
The other extraordinary moment when King asks to hear the voice of God.
Yeah. And
it is, of course, the great Mahalia Jackson whose voice we hear.
That's right. Yes. It's a scene where we find, Dr. King in his kitchen. He's just taken out the trash for his wife. He's just had to tell her that he has to leave again to go on the road to Selma to pursue justice and dignity and freedom there. But the bottom line is he has to leave home, and he was gone for 27 days out of the month on any given month. And so this is an occasion where he tells her he has to leave. It's it's a tense conversation for a number of reasons, and he finds himself alone in the kitchen, and he asks, he calls Mahalia Jackson and says he needs to hear the Lord's voice. And so from Mahalia Jackson to Amelia Boynton, a real living freedom fighter, 104 years old today, living in Alabama, who was central to the movement, to Richie Jean Jackson, to Annie Lee Cooper, a real woman portrayed by Oprah Winfrey in our film. But all of these women, Diane Nash, all of these women who contributed in different ways, it was absolutely imperative that they be present.
Now, you talked there about the idea of perspective and the importance of a point of view. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the LBJ representation kind of scuttlebutt that has become maybe the single most central talking point around this extraordinary film. What's your response?
My response, honestly, is that I think it's an unfortunate distraction to a film that is not about LBJ. It's not about LBJ.
Do you think that's the problem, that the film isn't about LBJ ultimately?
Maybe for some people, yeah. But that's not what this is about. And, you know, I have refused to get into the fray and start to really break down history as I see it, because it only draws more and more attention to a very small group of custodians of President Johnson's legacy who find challenge with some of the portrayals as I see it. And so it has overtaken so many conversations about this that I've had to have with press, and pushed aside conversations that we were having before about the parallels between movement history in 1965 in Selma and movement history as it's unfolding presently in Ferguson. It's pushed aside beautiful things that are happening around the film, like 27 black business leaders deciding that this film was so important and needed to be seen that they ponied up their own money in an unprecedented move to allow children of all creeds and colors in New York City to walk into any participating theater and see the film for free. 7th, 8th, and 9th graders in New York City can walk into any theater participating in New York and see this film for free. Unprecedented. It's never happened. And so the fact that, I mean, I could go on and on about the beauty around the film. You know, our black cinematographer, Bradford Young, and the way that he lights and respects and honors black skin on celluloid in a way that we've not seen in who knows how long, the care in which those images are made and cultivated and what that does for us as people of color as we consume them. So many great things to talk about, and yet everyone wants to talk about this. It's a challenge to me because it is a distraction, it is noise. I respect the opinion, I've heard it. And now we got to keep talking about it again and again. I mean, you have to ask about it. I'm not speaking of you. But I'm just saying, you know, in terms of the spirit around the film at this point, I'm just really interested in shifting the energy back to the real intention and the motivation and the mission of this film, which is certainly not to talk about LBJ ad nauseum.
Well, it's interesting because I actually saw a parallel, for me just as a viewer, between the representations of LBJ and then the one I want to ask you about right now, which is the representation of SNCC and SNCC as activists. And as I watched I thought, well, neither one of these are quite what some of the historians of LBJ or of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee would offer. But they both felt to me like precisely how I would have felt if I were an SCLC organizer. So in other words, if I were standing in, next to King, not as King perhaps, but next to King, then that it might be precisely how I would see LBJ as an impediment that we had to move, and SNCC as upstarts that we had to sort of manage, even if SNCC and LBJ themselves did not see themselves that way. And I'm wondering if that's part of what's going on there.
Perhaps. I mean, every storyteller has to have a point of view, and the point of view of this film is coming from King and the SCLC and what they felt and what they were doing. I mean, we follow the SCLC as they storm into Selma. SNCC was already there. SNCC had certain ways about how they were going to do things. I mean, we even show a scene in which SCLC is talking about, Hosea Williams and King are talking about the fact that the students are upset and that they're not going to be so happy that SCLC has come in. And there's conversation and there's narrative around that. Look, I've heard folks that might not be happy with the fact that there's only one scene with Malcolm X. I've heard people not happy about the way way that we represent George Wallace. I mean, I'm a storyteller that had no responsibility to comfort, console, or rehabilitate the image and legacy of any of the many great minds who participated in this movement. That's not my job. My job is to tell the story and imbue it with the spirit of the time, to give you a sense of what it felt like, and give you the broad strokes of it with as much nuance and emotion as I can. I'm not here to read you a history book and to kind of remake a history book on film. It's impossible to do in 120 minutes. I'm trying to capture the spirit of a movement, to let people know who walk up to me, adults. I thought Selma was a character that Oprah Winfrey played. I've heard that 3 times as I've taken the film around the country.
Wow.
Did 4 little girls really die? Did those girls really? I don't even know the term 4 little girls. Just did they really kill children? It was a question that I got asked the other day at a screening. The questions that come up for folks that are just not acquainted with any of this at all. What I know we did with the script from where it was when I got it.
Yeah.
None of these people were even named. So now they're named, and I understand that by naming them, I open myself up to criticism as to the fact that they're not explored with much depth. But for me, it was important to name them and to let people who watch the film bear witness to Diane Nash, to hear the words Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, to at least see, James Foreman, to see Bevel, to see these people, to see Amelia Boynton. These characters, it were important to me to put in, even if I'm, having to duck and take some cover right now. I do so. I do it all again exactly the same way. Every single line, every single character, every single scene. It's exactly the story I wanted to tell. Now it's in the world and for people to decide for themselves.
So I want to ask you about part of what you tell us, because you said that part of what you're doing as a storyteller is to capture the feeling. And again, as someone who knew how the story was going to end, you would think I wouldn't be on the edge of my seat emotionally. But the film, the way that you manage the violence and the moments of the protesters standing there and facing the police officers as they put the gas masks on. Talk to me about the choices you made from a visual perspective, and that the film makes from a visual perspective, about how it's going to manage the question of this violence.
Well, there are many ways to shoot violence. I'd never shot violence before, but I've seen a lot of it on film, as we all have. And so for me, it was a question of how do you approach these violent acts in a way that allows people to look past the impact and look into the emotion of it. I wanted to get beyond the physicality of a blast, the physicality of a hit, the physicality of a gunshot. It's important to see the mother's face after a gunshot, the victim's face after the baton blow. What a woman looks like when a man puts their hands on her and pulls her down. What is the face? And so each time we did this, we slow the film down and we force you to watch it, to honor it by bearing witness to it. And foremost in my mind around every act of violence was reverence for the life lost. And that approach informed my aesthetic sensibilities, the way I blocked the scene, the way we developed and designed the camera angles, the work with the actors, the work with my cinematographer, Bradford Young, the work with my editor, Spencer Averick. It was always about reverence for the life lost and the broken body, usually a broken black body, and what that looks like and what it means. So those are some of the ideas, some of the artsy-fartsy ideas that we have when we make film. I have when I make film, interrogating every image and trying to embed it with a sense of something more than just a hit. That was the idea.
There's also a physicality, an actual weight to the emotional and political weight that King is carrying that I'm not sure I've ever seen in a representation of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. before. That he is clearly heroic in these important ways, but I'm not sure I've ever seen him quite so human. Talk to me about the choices that were made both by you and by your cast to get there.
Well, that was our mission, was to humanize King. I mean, that was our refrain as we went about this endeavor. You know, I have said before, I really, Melissa, I hate historical dramas. I can't tell you. I can't describe to you how much I don't like history movies. I just really, I'm spitting. I've got to let you know how much I don't like them. But when this came in my lap, my father's from Lowndes County, Alabama. It's the opportunity to make the first film ever made by a studio, a major motion picture in theaters with King at the center. As a filmmaker, it's ripe. I can't say no. And so I find myself, the person who doesn't like historical dramas, making a historical drama. And first and foremost, it was about, how do I make this interesting for myself as a person who's really allergic to it? You know, and I had to interrogate, why do I not like these? Because they feel like medicine. They feel forced upon me. They have this patina of respectability.
Yes.
You know what I mean? This shine of like, oh, it's the past, so everything's okay now. So, and I just can't stand it. So for me, it was really about, how do we fix this? In a story about King, we got to deconstruct him, and I've got to see him, be a man. Because if I know that he was an ordinary man who achieved greatness, then I know that myself, as an ordinary person, has the potential to achieve greatness. And that is something that connects to me emotionally. So yes, you see King take out the trash. Yes, you see him arguing with his woman. Yes, you see him with a bit of ego. Yes, you see him depressed. Yes, you see him smoke a cigarette. You see him eat. You see him laugh. You see him cry. These are things that we all do, and so it seems kind of rudimentary, but this is what we fail to do in all of our historical dramas, and I think that's why, you know, I hear so often with black folks, I don't want to see that. Why do they always have to, you know, why do we always have to be seeing the old sad stuff? And you know, I hear it, and I've said it myself, and so we tried to make something that was really living and breathing, and to just bring these events to life in a way that gets into your DNA a little bit. That was our goal.
It's interesting to hear you say that. As we were preparing for this interview, one of my very smart producers says, well, you know, Ava is a woman whose films are about humans, and those humans are often black humans and bring all of their blackness, but they are humans. And now she had to make a struggle movie, and yet she makes a struggle movie that is about humanity as opposed to being exclusively kind of struggle film. And I think that for me is, I loved the moment when he's taking out the trash. It's probably my favorite King moment that you give us, because I think of what an act of almost love that is in that moment. Like he's saying, I'm going off to do all the things I have to do, but I'm gonna take the trash out first, baby. And you do see him trying to engage as a person in that moment.
Yes. And you know, I mean, we're talking about things that just should be, of course we should see him as a person. Of course we should see him more than, you know, a street name and a speech and a catchphrase, I have a dream, and you know what I mean, the local elementary school and the holiday and all of the things that Martin Luther King Jr.'s name have come to mean, which is very homogenized in my view. You know, this brother was a radical. He was a radical. He was a radical thinker. You know, we think about nonviolence. I know I had the you know, unfortunate history, my own personal history, in thinking of nonviolence in a way that felt weaker than some of the, you know, movement people that I've admired in my education of you know, Panthers. I'm from Compton, California, so Panthers. Right. You know, I'm like a, you know, Panther. Yep. You know, when you pick your superheroes, you know, King has his place, but when you really study and you really study the ideas, there is radical theory there, as we know. And so part of that was really about, part of this film was really about illuminating that as well, the deep strategy, the tactics that go into it. I mean, you ask most young people about nonviolence and you know, it's just dismissed without knowing the, you know, beyond the strength of character, but the real tactical strategy. You know, in this film we show very clearly the strategy of nonviolence to provoke violence, to amplify racism and oppression. to put your body on the line knowing that you were going to be violated, and to do that, to pursue freedom of life and livelihood. And
but at a cost. I mean, I think part of what's also important is if you'd left us with only the strategic. Wes Moore wrote a really lovely piece, I hope you'll get to read, about the film in Grantland, in which he talks about the king having to basically walk through the blood of the slaughtered to do this. He writes, the bloodshed of his followers of every race is a source of his sadness and guilt. He can't save them from pain. He can only lead them into it, into slaughter. But all there is to do about that is keep marching. And that idea of both the strategy, but also the cost, the weight, not only for those who are victimized, but for the strategist himself.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing about this time for me is, I mean, we deal with Selma. It's a 3-month period in our film. But the interesting thing when you look at it is, the time that folks died under King's direct watch. Yep. So, of course, many lost their lives in the movement. But during his direct watch, tactics that he was, participating in, directing, leading, amplifying, the loss of 3 lives in this very short period of time, it was very intense. There was a lot of guilt there, a lot of pressure. And so, yes, to show the strategy, to show the execution of that strategy, to show the cost of that strategy, the ultimate cost of it, and the reward. And so, the film has many layers. And does it satisfy every camp? There's no way to do it in 120 minutes. There's just no way. We're trying to capture the spirit of a time and kind of kiss every piece of it, so that you can go in and have more of a love affair, if I continue with the analogy, with these moments in history. And that's what we invite people to come in and take a look at.
So, Ava,
but certainly you're right when you talk about the perspective of the film being SCLC, and that really being perhaps why folks in other constituencies are having a challenge with that centering.
So, Ava, you say there is, I brought up the cost, you said there for a moment, and the reward. So let me ask you, knowing what we know now in 2015 about what is going to happen, what has happened to voting rights in these years, knowing what we now know from the perspective of 2015 about Ferguson, about where we are in terms of the level of segregation in American cities and housing and schools, was there a win? Did they win?
Yes. Absolutely. If they hadn't done it, you and I wouldn't be sitting here right now. You know what I mean? We can look at the deterioration of the act, the violence done to that act. We can look at where we are now in terms of the unrest that we all feel, the rage that I certainly feel around the most recent incidents about the breaking of the black body, unarmed and unindicted. We can look at these things that are on a continuum and easily say nothing has changed and there was no reward and it wasn't worth it. But to do that is to be disingenuous with really understanding where our elders and our ancestors were before these acts were passed and before this bravery this bravery occurred. This bravery was birthed and lived and breathed, and it did move us forward as a people, as a nation. Yes, we're in a really rough moment right now, but I think it's fantastic. I think the fact that this energy that's brewing now is one that is igniting a new spirit, a new mandate, a new mission, a new demand, moving people out of complacency and apathy into a posture of, wait a minute, we might have taken our eyes off the prize, we might have thought everything was done, but the fight isn't over. And that, in my adult lifetime, is something that I've not experienced. And so I see the joy in it, I see the beauty in it, I see the positives in it, the joy in walking with people, marching with people, holding hands with people, planning with people. When I'm on conference calls planning with my comrades about different action we want to take, activist action that we want to take, things that we want to do as artists, things that we want to do as Angelenos where I live, I am doing something that I wasn't doing a year before. And that's been activated by this new energy. And if Selma has anything to add to that conversation, it's simply to say, this is not new. This is a continuum. This is a continuation of what was done before. Just as 1965 Selma was a continuation of what was done before and what was done before. And I don't think there is a growth or a blossoming if you think it all started with you. You've got to know your history, and not in a spinach syrupy medicine way, but in a real visceral, I feel the little girls when they are blown apart. I see myself in them. I felt that in my gut. My God, is it happening again? The answer is yes. The question is, what now?
Can we talk about the little girls for a moment?
Yeah.
The film does something I don't even think I've ever imagined before by having those girls in the moments before they're murdered talking about Coretta Scott King as a style icon. And I thought, well, of course they would have. Of course, Coretta Scott King would have been someone they talked about in the way that my, now almost 13-year-old daughter talks about First Lady Obama, for example.
Yes.
Why that choice to have them talking about that in the moment before the really breathtaking destruction of the church?
Well, it was imperative that we hear the girls before they're taken from us. That was, as I was constructing the scene, a question of, how long do we hear them? What are they doing? I started to get images of them walking down the staircase and having a conversation. I called my mom, who was born in 1954. She was sitting at home in Montgomery, Alabama. And I said, what'd y'all talk about when you were little in 1965? She was like, what? So, what were little girls talking about in 1965? And she said, probably what little girls talk about now. Hair? Mm-hmm. I was like, hair.
Of course.
Of course.
Of course.
That's all sisters talk about.
Of course,
hair,
they were
right?
talking about how Coretta did her hair.
Yeah, Coretta did her hair. And so as I started to think about hair, I started to think about the iconic position that she held even at that time, as it was happening, as history was unfolding. She was our Jackie O. She was there at that time. We'd not seen, they were our Camelot. And so to have them admiring her style, so I started to talk to many women who were alive at that time, who were older at that time, younger at that time. I did a whole little tangential day of research on your impressions of Coretta at that time and what people thought of her. I mean, she was like First Lady Obama, a Beyonce, dare we say. It was Diana Ross and Coretta Scott King, from what I heard, in terms of women that you could look at and see that glamour and say, wow, she looks like me, and that means something to me. So,
Ava,
that's how the...
Let me point this out, that this interview is going to air on Sunday, and you just became part of that, dear. We're going to watch to see what you're going to wear at the Golden Globes. You know that my 13-year-old daughter is going to sit and see you similarly in that moment of keeper of our history, but also of our style. Is that an odd place to find yourself, or are you ready to step into it?
That is an odd place to find myself. Because I am, inept in that area. So, yes, I hope that anyone who's watching me is not looking at style. I'm happy for folks to look at the work that I do. But please don't look too closely at the dress, the earrings, the hair, because that makes me jittery. But yeah, no, I mean, the idea that anything that I'm doing is being looked upon with any kind of pride. I said to one of my key collaborators about this as we set about to do this work, Paul Garnes, my producing partner. I want to really do something special with this. I have a lot of goals with it, but one of them is to make Black folk proud of it, Black folk proud of this history, and to really walk away with a sense of care. And of tenderness for this time and everyone who fought for freedom during it.
Well, you've done that. I have only 2 minutes, but I have to ask you about two white men who are not named LBJ. One of them is Brad Pitt, and the other one is
Thank goodness.
And the other one is Roger Ebert. Tell me about the role of white men in Hollywood in their responsibility to bring these stories to all of us.
Yes. Well, I mean, this picture was spearheaded in terms of the production, the producers, by, a group of international coalition of producers. We had French financier and UK producers and the American team, which was Plan B, which is Brad Pitt's company, who's really putting their money where their mouth is around really, really progressive stories that are interested in diversity and nuance of the American story. And so, it's beautiful to be involved with them. And then, it was really all supersized when Oprah Winfrey came on board. This film was dormant until she stepped in, and not just with her name, but with her grace and with her love of this time. The day that we shot her scenes was the day that Maya Angelou passed. That very morning, as she was driving to the set for her first day of shooting, Maya passed. And so, that was with us. That energy was with us as we shot Miss Winfrey's scenes, Oprah scenes, and so yes, that those producers, I talk about in the Roger Ebert documentary Life Itself, which his sister wife, Chaz Ebert, produced and is such a beautiful part of. I talk about how so often as people of color in this industry, we have to actually allow, ask, and permit, white men to be the carrier of our message to the public, whether it's a critic, whether it's a distributor, whether it's a producer. That is so much a part of the industry. For me, I was fortunate that Miss Winfrey, Oprah, I always call her Miss Winfrey, she hates that, Oprah was a part of that crew this time around. But so often we have to rely on them to be the carrier of the message to the larger public. And so I've been fortunate to be able to find some good eggs. But it is a challenge, and that's why when these films are interrogated for not being, enough of what everyone wants, you have to understand that we're working within certain parameters, and you have a group of people who are so ferociously fighting to keep it as true as possible against a lot of odds, that I hope that's recognized as people check out Selma.
Ava DuVernay, let me say, you achieved the goal of making us proud. We are extraordinarily proud of this film. Thank you so much for your time, and good luck at the Golden Globes. And I just hate to tell you, girl, they are going to be looking at the style. Just step on into it. Step on into it.
Thank you, sis. Thank you.